Hi, I'm James Williams and this is Chimes Media with my Union Jack and St George's flag, and this time I've got my brand new Make Britain Great Again hat. Brilliant. I've still got the price tag on it I think as well. Brilliant stuff. I was waiting for that one. I wondered whether we should have an alternative one like Make England Great Again. That would be mega, wouldn't it? And that might clash with some kind of copyright logo from somebody else you can think of. Anyway, right, so France won the 2018 Football World Cup, FIFA World Cup, and quite naturally they celebrated, wouldn't you? You know, you won the World Cup, you're the top of the world. And that went okay, and you know, families went out, normal French people went out, enjoyed themselves till approximately, I think it was about 11 o'clock that Sunday night. And then they were described as thugs and hooligans descended upon them, throwing bottles at families and God knows what else they did, wrecking shops, looting and pillaging. Well, that sounded to me like we've seen those sort of reports all year round, haven't we? It's the resident sort of, I don't know what you call them now, there's such a mixture of collection of different nationalities in there. Do you call them migrants? I don't know what you call them. They certainly don't seem to be proper French people, do they, to do that sort of thing. But they went out and wrecked the joint and spoiled the celebrations, and what was a great tribute to France got marred by that sort of behaviour. Well, anyway, that's what the European world is like nowadays, and I hope that the United States and any other country doesn't go the same way as Europe's gone. I noticed that in South Korea they had 1,000 Yemeni Muslims turned up as tourists and took over an island, a touristy island, and then declared that they were seeking political asylum. And the South Koreans came out in force for that. There was a petition of 500,000 signatures from South Koreans decrying it and saying it wasn't safe for the women, it wasn't safe for elderly people to come out, and they wanted them sent back. We're not putting up with that, they said. Well, imagine the outcry if that was us over here in Britain, which does happen. How much racism we'd be called. But you can't really call the South Koreans racist. They have seen, they said they don't want to be like Europe's gone. And quite sensible too. That's probably why the South Koreans are amongst the highest IQs in the world. They've probably got the sense to realise that. But they haven't got to contend with an oppressive regime that we have now that goes under the guise of democracy. This week there's been the appeal hearing of Tommy Robinson, which took place on Wednesday the 18th of July, and Tommy remained in his prison cell. He was linked up by TV links, satellite link, whatever they do it, and he watched the proceedings from there. We had 3 justices and the top judge of England and Wales, Lord Justice Chief Justice Ian Burnett, and he and the other 2 judges seemed to be quite sympathetic to Tommy's case. So they had the whole court to spend there. I think there were about 87 other cases, but Court 4 in the Courts of Justice in London was singled out for Tommy's case alone. A number of procedural problems with that. One of the things, for example, there's deep doubts about the original conviction and trial of Tommy back in Canterbury last year, and the conditions of his suspension were not made plain. And when he was arrested in Leeds for this ongoing trial, the trial had already ended. It was the jury were going out for deliberation, and Tommy had been strutting around for an hour and a half before, making live broadcasting, and the judges and police were all aware of this and did nothing to intercede. Apparently it seems that they were waiting for the moment for him to say the wrong thing, and in the end they lost their patience and decided to nobble him anyway. Well, when they sort of trotted out that he'd breached his bail and they said, oh, he admitted his guilt, they hadn't explained what his guilt was for. They hadn't explained how he had breached that condition of suspension. and not reporting on cases. They hadn't explained that properly. So I think it was Politico, a guy called Politico. I think he's in Winchester. He does some very good analysis and good spiel about it. And he sort of likened it, said like, it's like being arrested for a theft or something, and confessing to it, and then finding out actually what you'd confessed to was murder, which you hadn't realised that was the case. So that's a bit sort of a crude analogy of what was wrong with it. But nevertheless, it was all wrong. And it seems that a series of procedural faults, the Crown in their defence tried to say, well, in spite of all these cock-ups we've made, it's not grounds to release him. Well, the judges have retired, and they said they'll come out with their result by the end of July. That means that Tommy's got to sit in a prison for another 2 weeks before they can even think about letting him go. It's kind of why the question's been asked. Well, why couldn't they let him out on bail? Well, why couldn't they let him out on bail? They let these sex offenders that he was covering. They were all out on bail. They were allowed. They wander around and work and do all their normal functions. And all Tommy was trying to do was to highlight the wickedness of their case and basically as well the cover up by the authorities. And he gets whacked over the head with it and gets treated really severely as if he's some kind of paedophile or something. He's trying to stop the paedophiles. He's not on their side, and I think most people can relate to that. I remember seeing a speech by the UKIP leader Gerard Batten, and he'd said that in Tommy's case, if you're normally convicted of some criminal act, then you've usually exploited some vulnerable person or abused some weaker person, somebody less capable of defending themselves than you, exploited something. You've done harm to someone. What Tommy was doing was trying to protect those who were being harmed. He was defending the vulnerable and the weak. He is actually a Robin Hood type character, real life. And that's probably why he's attracted such attention from across the world, including the White House. And I don't think the British authorities understood this. There was also in this hearing, I believe, questions over the gagging order of Tommy's arrest, why that was the case. That seemed to be totally inappropriate, and I think that attracted a lot of ire from across the world as well. It's interesting that we seem to have got this chasm now, a political type chasm. It seems to be affecting many nations, certainly the European and American nations, where you've got a real divide between what they call left and right. In America, Democrat and Republican, where the people like Trump can do no right in the eyes of some people, and anything he does is evil without any evidence at all. And the same goes with the effects of Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage. They get condemned quite wrongly, in my opinion, just my opinion, for what they stood for. I don't agree with everything they all do. I don't agree with everything the wife says. Why should I? We're individual people. We don't go out and sort of, exercise some kind of hate. Which brings me on to the next subject, the Met Police. A report has come out, it's in all the papers, the Times, Telegraph, etc., that the Metropolitan Police, that's the police governing London, in case you don't know, have misreported, I think the number was 95,000, some say up to 100,000 crimes in a year. Misreported it. What have they done? Is this to try and keep the figures down? Do you mean to say the crime figures are 100,000 worse than we already have, when there's continuing increases in knife and violent assaults? Kind of interesting, isn't it? You have to. In my area, in Portsmouth, they've been closing down police stations. Well, not just in my area. Much of the of Hampshire and the rest of the country as well. Police stations closed down, so if you want to go report a crime, you have to jump over several hoops to get it to be reported. You're told to phone up, was it 101 or something, and they'll sort out your little dilemma. And very often they just give a load of appeasement and nice talk, but they don't solve anything. So the crime figures are being very much suppressed, I believe, by the lack of, not just the lack of reporting, the incorrect recording of reports, and the lack of police to report to. It's all kind of deliberate, cuts costs, makes it look good, but it's not good. Many of the people who think that it's okay to have violent criminals into our country unauthorised, they don't live in the areas where they get assaulted, where they're risking getting raped and things like that. We live, if you send in 10,000 migrants to live in a particular city, they're not living in the nice leafy suburbs, with £300,000 mansions that people live in. No, they're not living there. They're living in next door to the council dwellers, council flat dwellers and things like that. It's ordinary people that are having to put up with this. Now, I'm not condemning individual migrants. That would be ridiculously wrong. And I'm not condemning individual Muslims. Again, that would be wrong. I know some very nice people who are Muslims. I know some very nice people are migrants, and many of them work really hard. I've seen Polish people, for example. They work like stags, they do, so they do contribute. But very often the people who are contributing most are actually legal migrants. They've come in through the proper processes. And that's an interesting thing. Now, I want to go back to the Met Police, because they came out with a definition of what hate crime is. Okay? And they've got a little GIF out. They've got a couple of mobile phones they're showing, and they're having a little argument. And one of them basically says, well, I don't like your mobile phone. And so the police say, well, that's not hate, that's an opinion, right? And the other one says, I'm going to bash your brains out. Well, that's hate. Hold on. If somebody threatens to do you harm, that was always illegal anyway. It was always classed as common assault. Assault is putting you under fear of harm being inflicted upon you, basically. And that's always been the case. It's always been illegal. So why is it now called hate crime? And not just that. Hate is an emotion. How do you know what emotions I have, or anybody else has? Are you a psychologist? Have you done an analysis of what I'm talking about, that what I'm saying comes from a hateful place? I might have a different opinion that clashes with your own. It doesn't make it hate. So the definition of hate is somewhat askew, and it makes you wonder what they actually mean by that. Well, there was an example on one of underneath the tweets that they put out, the Met Police, and I think one guy said he was passing by a mosque in London, and he's a white man apparently, and they got abused for being white scum. So he reported it, and he was the one called racist, and they sent our Muslim police officer on his own to come and speak to him. And you get those sort of reports. Well, is it therefore not possible to be racist against white people? It seems to be, although the law, as it's written, as I understand, unless they've changed it, doesn't distinguish. It just says, your colour of your skin or whatever. But nevertheless, where it's being applied, it appears that if you're white, you get ignored if you make a racial complaint, but not the other way around. Now, this is the disease, I suppose you could say, of the left, of the Marxist left, that seems to have afflicting societies. That the way the Marxists look, there's always two groups of people. There's always the oppressed and always the oppressor, and they can't cross-pollinate. Well, anybody with an ounce of brains know that no things are 100%. There's always overlap. There will be white people who are racist against black, but there will also be black people who are racist against whites. But that can't be the case in the Marxist model, because that's not acceptable, because then you can't have oppressor being the oppressed now. That can't happen. But in reality, that is the reality. That is the reality. I think that's what angers a lot of people. If it was fair game either way, if it was meted out equally and fairly, people could accept that. But it seems not. It seems that's the way we're going. And so we continue to have this chasm, this sort of mental illness, I don't know what you call it. I'm trying to make sense of it. Whereby society is getting increasingly divided. And it's really bad. Because at the end of the day, when we start to polarise, the thing that comes after that is usually war. Thanks for listening, and take care until next time.